let's dive into how, now that we've seen how the server handles it, let's dive into a little bit about how my core kind of connects and kind of the process of getting a plugin started, so to speak. Okay, so with this, we're going to come in here and we are going to, so with that, all right, connect socket. So this connect sockets after login is important. So this technically runs after you log into the game. This event will fire, or this method will fire. This runs right after logging in. Alias your own socket events, similar to how you would add plugin commands. So anyone who's developed anything for RPG Maker MV understands what this is. You know, the plugin commands under Game Interpreter, we alias the heck out of it because you would add your own arguments on top of the add plugin commands. It's the same kind of concept with connect sockets after login. So a good example, online chat. So if I come down here, game network, connect sockets after login. This is what I was talking about right here. So if we alias it real quick, we alias, and now we actually run our code on top of this. So that way every other one can call this connect sockets. Every other plugin that we want in the chain can call this connect sockets. So really quick, these are the two big lines. So I'm actually going to copy these real quick. You want to what? I will copy all of this. We're going to make our own JS plugins file, new file. Let's call this online global VARs. Yeah. Gotta remember the JS. All right. So let's paste that in there. Close off our brackets. Close off our brackets. Close off our brackets. Change our name. Our alias name. All right, so we're gonna take this alias, paste this, paste that over there. Do that. All right, so now this game network connect socket is running this connect socket right here, which is the socket name and the namespace. And it takes the URL, connects the IO. So here's what's happening here. The client has to actually connect to the various namespaces. So the way that it does this is we take the socket. This is actually putting it to this socket object that I have instantiated up here. So you can actually take the list of objects. So it just puts it to a more global namespace. And we're connecting with the URL that's defined in your main core plugin parameters, and then the namespace, which is the second argument in the function. And then it's taking the game network token so that we can authenticate properly on the server. And it is connecting, setting the x-axis token with the game network token, once again, to make sure everything goes through correctly. And then your socket is fully authenticated. With that, so with this global var, so we're gonna connect the socket, and instead of chat, we're gonna call this, let's just call it global, let's do everything lowercase. Ooh. Global var, and let's do global var here. And we can do false. What's that third one? What's that third argument? Apparently I had a third argument in the past, but I don't have one now. It's a good thing to find out. All right. So here's what's going on. So we're calling all the other socket connection with the alias. So things like online chat can run. And then we are running our connect socket, and we're going to connect to the global var. So we can get rid of this for right now. All right. Okay, really quick, I'm just going to wrap this in an anonymous function just so we don't mess with global namespacing. Function. Whoa. I am all thumbs today, folks. Wow. And then we'll execute the function. All right. Self-executing function. Self-executing anonymous function. My apologies. All right. With that said, next thing on our list, once we do this, is we want to start making listener events. So Socket.io has a very distinct pattern. Well, like I said before, it's bidirectional. So you have emitter events and you have listener events. Okay. Emitters. Okay. Emitters and listeners. Okay. Generally, emitters start off with either emit, usually have the keywords, emit or broadcast. There's a couple others that they have, but those are the two big ones, emit and broadcast, and listeners have the main thing of on, have a main keyword of on. So this emit and broadcast and this dot on, you'll see what I'm talking about, is the actual listener of it. So we have to emit and we have to listen to an event. You use the event names to emit and to listen. So what do I mean by that? All right, so let's make something here. So one of the things that we're going to have to listen for. So let's think about this from a holistic standpoint. Okay, what are we trying to do here? With this plugin, what we are trying to do, just so we can kind of recap of everything. With this plugin, we are trying to send a variable to other people on the server. Okay, so let's say we're opening a chest. And that chest has a variable of 6, a variable switch of 6 that's open. It opens for everyone else and they see the chest then open. Okay, that is the game plan. That is what we're trying to do here, is we're trying to push that value of that chest as equal to true or false. Okay, or a variable, if you will. So we can either do switch or a variable, and actually we're going to do both, because why not? So one of the things that we want to do is we want to be able to say, hey, if I receive a switch event, I want to change that value. Okay, so really quick, let's look at the online chat, and I want to see how I did. So Socket is up here, Socket game, Socket chat. All right, so really quick, I'm actually going to take this back. I am going to put this here because I'm going to instantiate. You want to what? I'm going to do similar to what I did in my other one. All right, just to make this easier, I'm going to set this equal to null up here. All right, so anyone who's not familiar with self-executing anonymous functions and why I do a self-executing anonymous functions, this VAR socket, if this was not here, this VAR socket would be a global variable. But because I have this within a self-executing anonymous function, this socket equals null is only limited to the end right here. This socket will not appear on the global namespace, so nobody can mess with it in the global namespace. The reason why I'm doing it like this is so that I can then do listener events a lot easier. So what I mean by that, so if I do socket.on, which is that keyword that I was talking about, that on listener, okay, and I listen for, let's say received switch, okay, and we're going to do a callback function, and it's going to receive some sort of data, and then we're going to do something with that data. So do something with received data. Oop. Oh. Okay. So I before E except after C. All right. Yep. I did not win the spelling bee when I was a child. All right. With that said. All right. So we have now socket.on receive switch. So instead of writing, so the reason why I did this socket null, socket equals this, and then socket this is so that I wouldn't have to write this every single time, because I could do this. But that just looks horrible for now and wouldn't help with the teaching of this. So for now, I'm just going to keep it like this. But know that you don't have to do it in this way. You could just take this globalish object of game network underscore socket dot chat and do it that way. And the reason, whoa, not chat, global var. Wow, glad I found that one. All right, there we go. So the reason why this works is in the main core, we actually set this underscore socket, which is the game network dot underscore socket, and then the socket name. So we set our socket name to global var. We can now call this global var, and we're setting it to our socket so that we can now make our listener, and later on we'll make our emitter events with this as well. But understand that this socket, you could substitute this at any time. All right, with that said, let's rock and roll. Okay, so the next event listener we're going to want to do, it's pretty much the same exact thing except the variables. So instead of receive switch, we're going to do receive variable. Okay, and do something with receive data. Cool. All right. So those are, I think those are the only two things that we're actually going to be receiving here. All right, so that's all we need to worry about with that. Now, what about actually sending the data? So let's think about this for a second. How do we want to send the information? Well, if we send it whenever we change a variable or change a switch, maybe that would make sense. All right, so let's look up how we change. Let's do switches first, because switches should be a little bit easier. I believe under objects, and I believe it's under set value. Right here. So we're actually gonna copy this. We're gonna paste this right in here. All right, so what do we got going on here? We got set value, switch ID, and value. If switch ID is greater than 0 and less than data system, that's perfectly fine. Switch ID equals value, and then this on change, which just let me check to make sure it's not doing anything weird here. Map refresh. Okay, so that's not a big deal. All right, that looks pretty good to me. All right, so we can do one of two things here. This switch ID greater than 0 and switch ID less than game switches is just a quick check to make sure that, you know, there's no data coming in here that's just weird. And actually, the best way to do this is to alias it. Whenever you could use an alias, it's just generally good practice to do that way. It's more compatible with everyone else's plugins in general. So it's just good practice, so we're gonna do it in this situation because we can. So we're gonna do var, let's call this global switch set val global switch set val equals here, let's do online. There we go. We're gonna set it equal to this. All right, and we are going to call. Let's apply it this, and then our two values right here. All right, and we're gonna actually copy this. So let's get rid of that. Let's put this up here. Let's get rid of these two things. All right, this data switch ID equals value. All right, so all we need is really the value and the switch ID. All right, so we can get rid of this as well. All right, so here's what's going on here. Send data to server. All right, so really quick, here's what's going on. Okay, whenever we call this game system game switches set value, which is pretty much any time in the game where you flip a switch. for whatever reason, you turn the switch on, you turn the switch off, it's going to run this because it gives a switch ID and a value. So really quick, we're just going to do the same kind of check to make sure that the switch ID is in between the right numbers. Okay, and if it is, we're going to send data to the server, and it's going to run its normal switch ID, its normal set value. Okay, so with this, we are going to run our send data to server. All right, and then we're going to send it that and that. All right, really quick, before we move on too far from this, we're going to actually delete that. We're going to copy all this. And we are going to make a new socket module. So let us make a new file. We're going to call this global var.js. Okay, and we're going to copy over example socket and throw it into our global var. First thing we're going to do is change up our name, and we got to call it the same thing that we called it here. So global var. I'll just copy and paste just for sake of argument. Cool. All right, and we don't need to worry about this test function, but we'll keep this here because this is what we use for our listener events here. So we'll be emitting right down here and catching it over here, which I'll show you in a second. So log that. All right, that looks all set there. The only thing that we need to do at the end is add everything to the server, which we'll do in a second. Okay, so now we're gonna send our data to the server. So now I still have my socket variable, so I can call this socket variable here, and we're gonna use this emit to emit the data to the server. So we're gonna use emit, and we're gonna call this send switch data. This is the other thing. You want to keep it as small as humanly possible, but descriptive as humanly possible. So send let's do switch data to server. Okay, and we are going to send it an object. Okay, so you can send it an object, and we're going to send it an object of switch, and we're going to do this the switch ID, and we're going to send it a value. Let's send it a value of value. Okay, so here's what's going on here. All right, so we're going to emit switch data to server, and we're going to send our data to the server of switch ID and value. Okay, we're going to send to this object. Then on our server, we're going to catch. So if you notice, we're kind of going through a pattern here of sending, receiving, sending, receiving. That's exactly how Socket.io works. It's a constant send, receive, and who's sending and who's receiving and who's processing data. Okay, so instead of socket on test, we're going to say, hey, listen for switch data to server. Oh, not there. We're going to say socket on switch data to server. And instead of log info.test, which is just going to console log the text test, okay, we're going to take this data, which is going to be our object, so our switch and our value, okay, and we are going to send it right back to everyone else in the room, okay, this receive switch. So this is the second part that I was talking about with emitters. So this broadcast event, and let me just double check on my emit cheat sheet, sending to all clients except the sender, okay, right here. So socket.broadcast.emit. Okay, and we're even gonna copy this. We're just gonna copy this because it's easier. So when we switch data to server, so we're gonna receive this data, and then we're going to emit back this data. Okay, we're gonna broadcast emit, and instead of broadcast, we're gonna do this receive switch. So now we're gonna broadcast this receive switch, and we're going to send it back the exact same data. Okay. All right, so we're going to send. All right. So really quick, here's what's going on. I know this is kind of complicated, but it's really powerfully simple. So here's what's happening. So we're coming in here. The first thing that's going to happen is you flip a switch. It's going to say, great, I'm going to send this switch data to the server. So switch data to server. Oh, look, I have an event that catches that switch data to server and takes your data, and I'm going to rebroadcast it to everyone else on the server, this receive switch. Oh, look, all the other clients have this receive switch, and they are going to then do something with this data object. Okay, so now we're going to actually do something with the received data. So now what do we want to do with this received data? So now we are on, let's pretend we're on a second machine, and we have now received the switch. What do we want to do with it? Well, I mean, the first thing we want to do is set its value, right? We want to set its value to whatever value we now have in our data.value function. The problem with this is that if we run this same game switch set value, it's going to mess with the amount of emit events that we then run to our server, and it's going to create all sorts of weirdness. So the better thing to do here is actually, and once again, this is something that I found out from doing this myself with my own game. The best thing to do with this is actually take our set value function, and what we're going to do is we're going to copy it and create a new a function that does pretty much the exact same thing, but is just completely different. So we're going to do set network value. Okay, so set network value does the exact same thing as set value, except not this socket emit again. So the reason why we want to do this is if we kept going into this, it would just create a loop where it would go through more times than necessary. Okay, so if we have the set network value, we have the switch ID. Okay, so now we should be able to just come in here. So now we have this data, and we want to switch our own. So we say set network value. So now we can just do as simple as game switches dot set network value, and now we have two. So data, remember, this data has been passed from the original client to the server in this data function. It has been broadcasted to everyone else within the room, which there are no rooms, so it's the global room. So everyone in this room is getting this receive switch with the data object, and this data object has a switch and a value. So we want the switch ID in the value, which is the switch and the value. So we're going to do data.switch and data.value. Okay. All right. So now we should have half of this plugin done. I mean, essentially.